So, the hope of home, at peace with home, the joy of home, in love with home, all with so many dimensions, our home, what we think of home. And this is what we've been talking about over the last several weeks leading up to this Christmas time. And to be there, at home, we must think of this space with dimensionality. Not either or, but as something that there's more to it, maybe even a fourth and fifth dimensionality. With all the mystery, with the math, the physics, and faith that this asks of us. On this long, dark night, we consider that we must be present in that, in the darkness, to be home, because we know that even the darkness is as light to God. I love what Joan Chittister says in her book, Between the Dark and the Daylight, Embracing the Contradictions of Life, because life is very, very much full of contradictions, right? She says, psychologists tell us that one of the most difficult conditions a person can be forced to bear is light deprivation. Darkness, in fact, is often used in military captivity or penal institutions to break down an individual's sense of self. Once a person becomes disoriented, once they lose a sense of where they are, once they can no longer feel in control of their physical surroundings, a person loses that sense of self. Every shed of self-confidence shrivels. The giant within them that they always felt before falls, and they become whimpering prey of the unknown. The natural instinct to be combative is paralyzed by fear. The spirit of resistance weakens. The prisoner becomes more pliable, more submissive, more willing to take directions. It disarms a person, this fall into the sinkhole of sensory deprivation. It can drive them to madness even over time. It is, every military knows, an effective technique. Just keep them in darkness. Simple as it may seem, when the lights go out, we simply lose our bearings. The density of the dark makes it impossible for us to fix our positions anymore. We don't know how far the wall is, or the furniture, or anything, or a person. Lightlessness leaves us no internal compass by which to trace or set our steps. Unlike the blind, few sighted people ever learn to develop other senses enough to rely on them for information about the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Interestingly enough, it is those who consider themselves sighted who are the most limited without light. And so in the end, the dimness undermines the average sighted person's self-confidence, affects their vision, leaves them totally vulnerable to the environment and out of touch with the people around them. And that's only its physical effects. The darkness of the soul is no less spiritually punishing than is the loss of physical light to the psyche. We talk about faith, but cannot really tolerate the thought of it when our soul feels dark. It's light that we want, not shadow. Certainty, not questions. Right? The aphotic, this place without images, is no less an attack on faith and hope than those periods of life when nighttime brings nothing but unclarity, nothing but fear. Where am I going? The soul wants to know. When will this be over? The mind wants to know. How can I get out of this sightless place I'm in? The heart demands. When you're despairing, it's always the when will this be over? So Chittister evokes the 16th century Spanish mystic, St. John of the Cross, in the Dark Night of the Soul. I don't know, many of you might have heard about this ancient poem, but it's been actually very instrumental in our spiritual life, both Pastor Howie and I. But he wrote this dark night of the soul, and he calls this, it's the stages that the soul must go through to get to union with God. And he was taught by St. Teresa of Avila, who had a similar way of speaking about the many mansions of the kingdom of heaven within, that you go deeper and deeper into the mansion, to the center where Christ is. And so here's some of the things that he says in this, called the Stanzas of the Soul. It says, on a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, oh happy chance, I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder disguised, oh happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. This light guided me more surely than the light of noonday to the place where he, well, I know who, was waiting for me, a place where none appeared. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that joined the beloved with the lover, lover transformed in the beloved. With his gentle hand, he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. Suspending all my senses. He explains that it's not only at this point, that it is only at this point of utter senselessness versus reliance on the senses, this complete light deprivation of the soul. It's only here that one can experience union with God, full union. In that space that cannot be defined, transcending space-time, this other dimension of home that's dark, while a light only with God's deep love for us. And it is in this darkest night of the year that God chose to pierce time and space, entering the utter darkness of our world to be the light of and to all of creation. All of us have known if there our fair share of darkness this last year, the last couple of years, in the seemingly never-ending COVID ordeal in all sorts of ways. And when at our darkest moments we cannot bear to even be seen by anyone else, because that's what happens when you're in the deepest depression. You just don't want to even go out. The pain and the fear are so profound. It is precisely here that my soul is best ready to commune with Jesus at the very center. The light beyond all our senses. The key of imagination, another dimension. This might sound familiar. If you get it, say it out loud. A dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've crossed over into the twilight zone. Whenever I think about these things, I always think about that. I also love Manhattan Transfer, and they have the twilight tone, and I won't sing it for you because I wouldn't do it very well. So yes, when we're physically blinded, lightlessness leaves us no internal compass by which to trace our steps. But it's precisely in this state of soul present to this darkness, this senselessness, and it's a suspension of senses. It's not an eradication of the senses, right? Because God gave us those senses. But to suspend them, not to rely on them, It exposes the inner being to the possibility of rapture, to the complete abandon to Jesus' healing and transforming embrace. Do you sense Jesus' embrace? It's in the darkness that our internal compass is a reality, because that compass is now the Christ, through whom all things were made. Through Christ, all things were made. The mother who bore the world, gave birth to everything, this Christ, who ordered the boundaries of the waters, the edges of cascading cliffs, the expanses of fields in which we attempt to cultivate our corn. Christ ordered this. Christ, the way, the truth, and life, is our light. Joan Chittister puts it this way: there is a light in us that only darkness itself can illuminate. You've heard another saying that you cannot see the stars unless it's dark. The Christ, Emmanuel, God with us, came into this world in the most vulnerable state, a most unexpected state, a naked, unequivocally dependent infant, an itty-bitty of a baby, whose birth we celebrate this dark night. God with us was born to a vulnerable teenaged young woman who also experienced the reality of every aspect of motherhood, to birth God with us. A couple of years ago, my daughter Sam forwarded this poem to me, and I just think that it's important to read it here and now. It begins, "Sometimes I wonder if Mary breastfed Jesus, if she cried out when he bit her, or if she sobbed when he would not latch. And sometimes I wonder if this is all too vulgar to ask in a church full of men without milk stains on their shirts or coconut oil on their breasts, preaching from pulpits off limits to the Mother of God. But then I think of feeding Jesus, birthing Jesus, the expulsion of blood and smell of sweat, the salt of a mother's tears onto the soft head, the salt of the earth. Feeling lonely and tired, hungry, annoyed, overwhelmed, loving. And I think if the vulgarity of birth is not honestly preached by men, all who carry power but not burden, who carry privilege but not labor, who carry authority but not submission, then it should not be preached at all. Because the real scandal of the birth of God lies in the cracked nipples of a 14-year-old and not in the sermons of ministers who say women are too delicate to lead. This from a teenager who wrote this poem. The reality of this Mary giving birth to God with us. We have to suspend our senses, all of them, our expectation of how things ought to look. It's only in this space that we can be sensitized to see a different reality. God with us. If we learn anything from Jesus' presence, his words, his examples, if you've read the Gospels, it's that he went to the most unlikely places and he said the absolute wrong things leaders expected him to say. So why do we expect that of each other? So to be present to a home that was meant for us from God's first song, when God first spoke, we must be present to that light within. Hear the unlikeliest things. You are loved. You belong. You are mine, God says. You are home. This poem from Lucille Clifton, I've been reading several of hers throughout the last several weeks. This one's on Joseph, and it's short, but it describes such an experience. Joseph, who had a willingness to hear the fantastical pronouncement by the angel and to attend to the inner listening, despite what other people thought, while witnessing Mary's great faith, otherwise considered scandalous. So as with the poem of Mary last week, it's also visceral, evokes the embodied, out-of-body experience of the birth of Jesus and the phenomenon. And this is how he observes it, or Lucille Clifton describes his observance of it. Joseph. Something about this boy has spelled my tongue. So even when my fingers tremble on Mary, my mouth cries only, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Every time I read this, and I don't know why, I become verklempt. This holy, bloody, mystical, messy event, suspended in time, outside of time, pierces our time every day. Every moment. You can't help but hear with a different ear. Do you hear what I hear? A mother's cry, tissue tearing as she issues this infant who releases breath, his own cry, new life, salvation. Do your fingers tremble when you hear that cry, suspending your senses, your vision of how things ought to be, the tension of what others see? Allow your external sight to be darkened and attune the inner ear. Once we can be present in senselessness, that space between the darkest of the darkest, longest night and the first day of the new day, first light of the new day, senses suspended. The Christ born in the most vulnerable state to one of the most vulnerable people in her time, a teenaged, unmarried young girl, young woman, in whom God, the creator of everything, through whom all things are made, gave birth to everything. This Christ ordered the boundaries and the cliffs. The light who guides us in the darkness more surely than the new day did this to be one with us, so we could know we belong to God. The lover transformed, in the beloved, we're truly home. Have we lost the sense of profundity of what Christmas means to the universe, to us? Listen with me this Christmas Eve with an attentive ear. Stay with the mother and the adoptive father, a steward, this father, steward of God with us. What do you hear? Ears to Jesus. Together, let us be present to the night, this longest night. I know technically it was 3 nights ago, but let us be present to this night, be vulnerable. Let us suspend our senses and not anticipate what that means, but to hear with that inner listening. Home. In the profound peace of this night, home to the hope of a new day, nurtured by the joy of being home to reality beyond sensing, in love with a God who trusted a young woman to carry and give birth to and raise the mother of all creation, Jesus, our true home, transformed in the beloved. Be present to that space between the darkness of the night, and the first light of the new day. Be changed. Be transformed. Be at home.